Welcome everyone to this first breakout session. Congratulations once again for being certified as a top employer. You can be very proud of that achievement. I'm Jonas and I'm very thrilled and excited to be your moderator for today's session about diversity is not enough and why inclusion is so important as well. During this interactive Q&A session, we will talk to 3 HR leaders about their views, their best practices, and their opinions about why inclusion is so important for organizations. You, as the audience, have the opportunity to share your questions through the chat about how to support D&I initiatives within your organization. I know that there are a lot of HR professionals attending this session, but for the people who are not really familiar with D&I, I would like to briefly explain what diversity and inclusion means. First of all, diversity. Diversity is essentially about what makes you and I unique from one another. Think of basic traits and characteristics like gender, sexual orientation, what you believe in, what you stand for. So those are examples of what makes you unique. It's much more measurable and visible. If you look at inclusion, that's less visible. It's about, when you translate that to the workplace, it's about how to create an environment wherein everyone feels like they belong, feels like they're taken seriously, feels like you can bring your whole self to the organization. And when you bring in ideas to the table that you are taking seriously and feel respected. So really take that into account when going into this Q&A. I'm going to introduce to you the 3 panelists, and then I'm going to ask them a question as well, and then it's your turn as the audience to ask your question. You can do that already through the chat right now. So let me start with our first speaker. Her name is Mechell Chetty. She is HR Director for Africa for Unilever, and she's working for already 22 years for this company. Welcome, Mechell.
Hi there. Hi.
Hi. Could you maybe introduce yourself in a way you would like to be introduced? Just in 1 minute, please.
Yeah. Hi there, everyone. My name is Mechell Chetty, and I like to call myself the people escalator. It's much better than my long job title, and it really connects me with my purpose. My purpose is to build African leaders for Africa so that we can make a better world and a better society for us here on the continent. And I think by calling myself the people escalator, I know my work has to do with developing our great talent and making sure that they realize their potential.
Great. Your purpose sounds very inspiring. Thanks for that. I have a million questions for you, but I will narrow down to just one, if you would let me. And that is the following. Many organizations are grappling with driving an inclusive culture. How do you make people feel like they belong? Can you share what is working for you in this space, looking at your experience at Unilever and beyond that?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, firstly, we are on a journey and we'll be on a journey for a long time to come on this topic. And I think the importance of inclusion is you really make people feel comfortable. And I think that's a concept that is very basic, but so important, that people feel a sense of comfort and a sense of true belonging. And at Unilever, we talk a lot about the fact that every employee has potential. Every employee has a unique purpose. And how do we actually enhance that? And how do we bring that out of every single employee? And the only way to do that is to create an environment where our leaders create psychological safety, where people can truly express themselves, they can innovate, they can take risks, and they can be part of solutions that is uniquely born from who they are and the skill sets and the preferences that they have, that collectively will make us better as an organization. Now, clearly that means that our leaders have to come on board to create that psychologically safe environment. And a big conversation that we're having right now in the space of creating diversity and inclusion is to say, the concept of unconscious bias, whilst relevant, has to move because its time has come. It's no longer good enough for leaders to say, I did not intend for that to happen, or, I unconsciously said that because I have unconscious bias. We actually have to move to be consciously competent in the space of diversity and inclusion. So we're conversing on how our leaders can create competence around this, whether it's for matters around people with disabilities, gender, or even race.
Great, Mechell. I really like the part about psychological safety and making sure that everyone feels like they can put everything on the table. Thanks for that. Let's move on to our second panelist, and that is Raj Verma. He's the Chief Diversity and Inclusion and Experience Officer for Sanofi. He joined Sanofi in December 2020, pretty recently, in this newly created role. He has already 25 years of experience in global business transformation and change experience, which comes from having held both specialist and senior HR leadership roles. Welcome, Raj. Thanks for being here today. Would you like to add something to that introduction?
No, I think you've covered it well. Thank you, Jonas.
Great, great. Well, looking at your job function, you don't see that very often, that combination together, diversity, inclusion, and employee experience. Can you share your perspective on how you believe it will flow and how it's likely to impact your business?
Yeah, look, you're right. You don't see diversity and experience as two functions sat under one role, but I always question why not. My ultimate goal is to make sure that we can grow and retain the most diverse talent at every level in our organization. And I think that will definitely help us to become the high-performing organization we need to be and aspire to be. Now, to create that level of diversity, you need to make sure that you've got a culture that's inclusive. And one of the ways to drive that inclusion and feeling of belonging is to create those great employee experiences that people will remember and relate to. And that employee experience starts from the moment they think about applying for a role at Sanofi, so pre-hire, all the way to when they may one day leave Sanofi and become alumni and ambassadors of the brand. And it's all the touch points that they have with Sanofi during that period. So the way that I explain it is that, what we're doing is creating great employee experiences, and that's what I see as the input. I see the output as maintaining, growing, and retaining diverse talent at every level. And I see that the inclusion and belonging in our culture is what bring the two together.
That really makes sense then, Raj, after your explanation. I would love to see that with other organizations as well, that they combine it all together. Thank you for that. We come back to you later. Then our last panelist, for sure not the least, her name is Anne-Sophie Chauveau-Galas, and she was appointed Senior Vice President, Human Resources and CSR at the Alstom Group in May 2019. She's also a member of the Executive Committee. And she held various international positions at the Alstom Group. She's also a digital believer, a learning addict, and is passionate about talent management, especially grooming future leaders and connecting diverse people. Welcome, Anne-Sophie. Great as well to have you with us today. I've also one question for you. Could you share with us one or two best practices related to D&I that you are proud of?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Jonas. So what I'd like to say is first, in our company, we value diversity and inclusion. And the first key element to demonstrate that is one of our 3 company values is inclusion. So building an inclusive workplace is definitely key for all of us. And I'd like to make a focus today on inclusion for people with some disability, and to share with you 2 concrete examples so that it could be takeaways or sharing that you can maybe spread in your own organization. The very first one is called the WADA Week, the We Are All Differently Able. And that's a very nice initiative we launched 3 years ago. And the objective is really to raise awareness, including having more inclusive workplace, having different people with some different abilities. And for that, we get and collect all the best practices around the world, and we give some award to the best one. So it's really positive, it's keeping the momentum, and at the same time, it's a way to spread best practices from one country to another. One specific example, we have what we call extraordinary at work. We hire software engineer with Asperger's syndrome in our organization, and we started in Italy, and now we are doing it in many more countries. So I think that's a very nice way to be more inclusive in our workplace. The second concrete example on better inclusion of people with some disability is the just, I would say, released, so it's completely new, All Abilities Toolkit. And we have decided to have this as a kind of tips for all our employees to welcome better people with different abilities. And it's really very concrete, very pragmatic, so that the day-to-day is smooth for everyone. And I would say as a conclusion, I am receiving on a regular basis emails, messages, calls from employees to confirm to me that it's really positive. We need to move forward, and we need even to accelerate on building an inclusive workplace. So I think that's key for our organization, but I guess for many organizations.
Great, Anne-Sophie. Those are indeed great inclusive practices that maybe other organizations can work with as well for their organization. Thank you all. Let's dive into the questions from the audience. So I think it's time for the Q&A now. So let's look at the questions from you, the audience, and see what came in. I have one question I see here already. It's the following. What are your top 3 tips for other companies looking to create an inclusive environment in the workplace? Is there anything companies should stop doing or trying? Mechell, do you have your view on that?
I would say a couple of things. The first thing is really having your leadership enrolled with both their hearts and their minds on this. And unless you have the leadership enrollment, it's going to be very difficult to drive an inclusive culture or one that is representative of all forms of diversity. So what does that entail? I mean, firstly is understanding the why. Why does your organization want to drive diversity and inclusion? At Unilever, we serve our consumers, right? And our consumers are very diverse across the continents and across the world. And so we say to ourselves, we really want to understand our consumers. We want to get insights from our consumers. But how can we do that if we are not representative of our consumers? How can we serve our consumers if our employee base is not representative of the consumers? So there's a real compelling business reason for us to be diverse and inclusive. But the second thing is to say that you can be as representative as you want. So you can go out and have a whole campaign to recruit people with disabilities. But if you don't have an environment that supports and accommodates for that, you will lose your talent. And so leaders need to create the environment where everyone can indeed thrive. So I think that's the really important thing, is having the leaders involved. The second thing is having an ambition. and saying to yourself, where would you like to get to, and express that. Our CEO 10 years back set an ambition to say we will become gender balanced across all our organizations in Unilever globally. And we exceeded that target because it was one that came from the top and was a very clear and compelling vision that we could all rally behind and get behind with all the support mechanisms that came with it. So it wasn't just about recruiting women, it was about the support mechanisms. So I think that's the second thing, is having the vision to do this. And the third thing is enrolling your employees collectively to want to achieve that with you, and sharing your progress regularly, and getting employees to feel proud of creating an inclusive environment themselves. So those are my top three that I would share.
Really great tips, I think, Mechell. Thank you for that. Raj, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, look, I think what's really important is, as you're driving a culture of inclusion, you've got to be true to your brand. And I think it's really important that your mission, your purpose, your values are reflected in the experiences that you're creating for your people. And I think, you've got to be authentic. This is not about copying and pasting what other organizations do. Your culture of inclusion has to be yours, which takes time. Because if you want to really do it in a way that people feel as if they've created it and they've co-created it, then that will last. So I think from my perspective, the three words that I always use about education, engagement, and empowerment. And you need to have storytelling. People need to be able to share the experiences they go through. And it's the long journey. I think Mechell said earlier, it's a journey that will continue, but that's how you start to create the genesis of a culture where people feel they truly belong.
That's a great answer as well. So you're saying storytelling, really make sure that also the inclusive part or the inclusive culture is always there within the organization. Yeah, great. Let's move on to the next question, and that's the following. What would you advise to international employers located in countries where some D&I questions are in gray area or don't have clear regulation at government and even cultural level, for example, sexual orientation, women and leadership? Anne-Sophie, do you have a take on that?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do so, Jonas. We have a very large footprint in Alstom. We are present in more than 60 countries. And for sure, each and every country has a different culture, a different level of maturity related to D&I topics. And I think there is no one size fits all. I think we have to have globally in a company a kind of umbrella with some global targets and guidelines. But I would very much be in favor of customizing according to the countries. That is to say, if you have to focus more, for example, on some gender balance in some region or some countries, if you want to insist more on disability on some others, on some LGBTQ aspects in other countries, I think we have to be open-minded, to be flexible, to reflect, I would say, the local reality.
Cool. Mechell, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I do think it's not a one-size-fits-all, and I do think you need to be extremely sensitive about the different markets, cultural environment, as well as legal environments and just, government's take on things. However, I would say change only happens when you start pushing the boundaries and you start the conversation. And we should not neglect our responsibility as corporates and as business to start the conversation, and to do so in a way that moves the needle but still protects your employees and doesn't create more tension in the system, but really creates movement in the system and rallies people behind. Because I can tell you the movements that are happening by young people today, they are demanding a conversation. The Black Lives Matter movement, putting things out on the table on whether we have institutionalized racism or so forth, are the conversations that are to be had and fronted into. They're not comfortable conversations, but I think because of those conversations, we are able to look deeper than the surface and to bring about change in our own areas, which then is like a rolling ball, will gather momentum and spread more widely and change for the better. So I think it's a tension point, and it's a balance of both.
Right. And how do you make sure that that momentum is still there at all times, having those conversations, Mechell?
Yeah, I mean, I think with us, we've been quite open to share when we've had success with something and practices, or we changing the environment. Simple things. It's not always big, momentous things. It's simple things in your policies. We shared something on holidays, and the fact that people from different cultures, if you take the Christmas holiday, not everybody celebrates Christmas. So how could they interchange their holidays for valuable days that have meaning for them, whether it's religiously or otherwise? So how could they use their holidays differently and have an interchangeable holiday? There are many more such practices on working parents and how do we accommodate working parents. And that's why I say, and Raj will probably agree, when you're looking at the employee experience, sometimes we have to customize that experience based on the need that you have.
Yeah. Great examples. I have actually a question for Raj, and it's the following about the employee experience. How would you describe the Sanofi employee experience? And we know that you're recently appointed to this role, but can you share that with us, what you think already?
Well, I've stopped counting in days now. I'm now counting in weeks, so this is week 7. I think the challenge we have is we have to clarify what we mean by the employee experience. So as I said, it's a brand new function, but it's not brand new to the world of work. And when you're looking at the future of work, experience is really one of the key things that most organizations are trying to find a way of cracking. So when we're looking at end-to-end employee experience, we want that experience to really reflect what the Sanofi brand stands for. I think that's really important. There's no point saying that we're agile and nimble, and then we have a 20-page performance review process. We have to look at the policies, the practices, and things that we're doing. So we're going to be working through, some of the pain points that our employees feel. And I think, to Mechell's point, that level of personalization, how do you bring that consumer experience into the workplace that people feel as if they're the only one that Sanofi is looking after? And that's the challenge that we have. So as we're creating different ways of onboarding, different ways of looking at employee engagement, different ways of breaking down the employee value proposition, we have to keep in mind why we're doing it, what we're trying to achieve, and how it's going to help the culture that we want to be. So it keeps going back to the mission, purpose, and value. So the truth of our brand. That's how we're creating the employee experiences. So there's no copy and pasting anywhere. It is very much co-created, co-delivered, co-designed.
And it's an ongoing process. It never stops. Yeah.
It can never stop because you have to keep refreshing it.
Right.
And that's how you stay relevant.
Right.
So it's not a start and an end, it's constant.
Yeah. Great answer, yeah. I have another question, and that's the following. Which was the inflection point, breakthrough, initiative that made you truly made inclusion put on the agenda in your organization? Anne-Sophie, maybe you can reflect on that, looking at your experience at Alstom?
Yeah, sure. I think for us, the key point was in 2019, when we upgraded our company values. So we moved from team trust action to agile, inclusive, and responsible, to be aligned with the global Alstom strategy, the updated strategy. And I think this was a way so that each and every employee had an understanding that inclusion was fully part of the agenda and was a key priority for the top management, but as well was to be fully embedded in our culture, in our values, in our ways of working. And I would say this is really something that in a bit more than a year and a half now, we have viewed, and we can see the progress. We have more than 90% of our people who are completely aware of those values and who consider that we are a truly inclusive company.
That's a great number, 90%. That's pretty impressive, and I'm happy to hear that inclusion is part of your values. I don't see there any other questions, so I have one myself. What is one stereotype or myth of diversity and inclusion that we need to let go of? Mechell, what do you hear often that you're just like, this is not true, we should let go of this?
Oh, I mean, I think there are so many, right? So, I talk a little bit about the language we use in diversity and inclusion. And sometimes what I see a lot of in the organization, if it becomes something that gets onto the table and onto the strategic agenda, everyone wants to go after the goal and the target and get the representation right. And that can be really dangerous and short term, because then you want to recruit more people with disabilities, or you want to recruit more women, or whatever. But if you don't have the inclusion part, which say, what is our environment like? And you don't put out your plans to create a truly inclusive environment, then what you can do is begin to benchmark the employees who join your organization who are diverse against the existing kind of profile of talent that you have in the organization. So that's one thing that I see, which talks about the like me bias. So it's people like me, or they're not performing like me, or when I was in the role, this is what I did. So that is one of the common things that I see that we need to dispel, is that everybody brings their own unique strengths, and how do we work with strengths rather than gaps, and understand that truly different opinions make us better. So I think that is something that we really have to work on a little bit more. But maybe I'll also just reiterate a point that I've made about overusing the words unconscious bias, because it's a way of, oh, I didn't intend for that to happen. And we need to shift the needle. Why do you keep not intending for that to happen and it happens, to more, how do I become more conscious of what's happening? How do I become an ally? How do I become an equity advocate? And how do I create the spaces where I'm observing the potential tensions in diversity so that I can be a part of the change? So those are probably the comments that I would share on that.
It's great that you bring up the unconscious bias. Looking at the time, we unfortunately have to end this session. I thank you all so much for sharing your experiences and sharing your best practices. And also you, the audience, thanks for submitting your questions. For now, enjoy the rest of the event. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. Bye-bye.